So imagine this, you're playing a champion in the top lane and more specifically against Riven, and you're walking up to a minion as Yone and you just get outright one-shot. Long story short, you lose the game. Alright, we move on to the next game. You're playing Yone again and this time you're fighting Zed in the top lane. The minions clash and you want to farm the first 3 minions and boom, you're dead. Why? And how can I stop dying? Let's talk about spacing and kiting. There are 3 very important concepts we just absolutely have to talk about here, and the first one is spacing. Spacing is just how far you should be from a champion. Terrain is also taken into account here, as walls can protect you from certain champions. Riven versus Yone is an excellent example here, as Riven has high damage output with all of her Qs up. Yone is very prone to being bursted by Riven if he walks up to her effective range. However, the further Yone is away from Riven, the more Qs Riven has to use to close gap to Yone. This significantly lowers her damage output. So the way Yone does this is by maintaining a distance from her at all times and using his abilities to farm from safety and range to maintain that distance. This can be incredibly frustrating for Riven, causing her to use all her abilities to close gap, which in turn allows Yone to tip the scales and beat her without effort. Okay, so we know what spacing is, but how do we learn that skill? There are 2 main aspects to talk about, which is knowing the effective range of the enemy champion you're facing, and as well as knowing your champion's strengths and weaknesses. Let's say you're facing Riven again. Her strength is obviously the closer you are, the more effective she is in terms of damage output, and the more dangerous she is. By knowing from experience in this matchup, you have to stay a certain distance away from her. However, if you haven't played against Riven a lot, you might want to try the champion out in practice tool to see how far she can go with her 3 Qs. In essence, you should think about a champion's most important function. Riven's function is mostly her Qs and the passive she gains from her abilities, while a champion like Xerath, for example, just wants to stay from range and poke you down. The second part is knowing your champion's strengths and weaknesses. Yone has a self-shield ability on his W, and if he's facing someone with extreme range like Xerath, then Yone doesn't necessarily need to space against Xerath's incredibly long range of a Q, as he can negate that ability with his W, and therefore he could space against other abilities like his E, for example, or his W. Here's a few more examples showing the effective range of Scent, Aatrox, but a level 6 Vayne top with Ghost Flash probably has a spacing of this range, mainly because of auto spacing. Honestly, autospacing is a very advanced concept that should have its own video. Autospacing is another mechanic where you move so fast into your own effective attack range and then out of your opponent's champion attack range, while at the same time you get to hit them. The most famous example is of this clip of Deft. But you can also see here Irelia utilizing it. In very simple terms, this skill set is most utilized by champions of larger attack range than your opponent. For top lane, it would probably be Yone Irelia, which has a bigger attack range than Jax, for example. Now, because of this, instead of trading an auto for an auto or a 1-for-1, when the guy with the lower attack range is in the range of the guy with the larger attack range, the larger attack range guy can walk away until the lower attack range guy turns around and gives up. Then the larger attack range guy gets a free auto rather than trading autos. The reason why they trade like this is because if the larger guy hit while the shorter guy was chasing, is because you are locked in animation when you're auto attacking, making him catch up. Whoa, okay, hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but this is an advanced skill set you can use on Yone, because Yone tends to have a larger attack range than most champions in the top lane, especially with lethal tempo. In fact, Yone outranges around 26 melee champions, and he's outranged by 1, that being Irelia, and he has an equal range to 15 champions. Anyways, we have another very important concept to talk about, which is kiting. Kiting is probably one of the most important and most common concepts you have heard about. For example, you've probably seen these clips of Radarel just space gliding around, which is also known as kiting. However, this is still the case for Yone, as you can kite people with your Q. This is because it outranges most melee champions. And you also have movement speed from your E, which you can use as well. Kiting is an auto attack mechanic where you damage a champion while still walking. This means that you can damage champions while they have to chase you. In the case of Yone, this is done by focusing on using your Q and using E to assist as well. Take a look at a few clips from the 1000 LP Yone top OTP Zookill. Now, how do you practice kiting? In general, you have to use practice tool for this and try setups like this and that, and thereby you should auto attack move once you're near your opponent and then walk away after sending your auto attack. You can increase your auto attack speed and movement speed to make this harder. It's also better to bind your attack move to A or an easy to access keybind. On Yone, this is a bit harder, as you probably have to use a combination of spacing and kiting. You see, kiting doesn't necessarily have to be auto attacks, but it can be abilities as well. To kite on Yone, I recommend imagining that your Q is auto attacks. Use your Q and space against your opponent at the same time so he cannot auto attack you or land any abilities. I also forgot to mention that there are 3 different stats that affect these concepts, and that is movement speed, attack speed, and range. Having more or less of one or the other makes this easier. Spacing and kiting are 2 vital concepts for playing as Yone, but also on many other champions including mid laners, top laners, and ADCs. Knowing the effective range of your enemy champion and your champion's strengths and weaknesses are the key to success when it comes to spacing. Remember that spacing is about keeping a safe distance from your opponent's effective range, and kiting is about using auto attacks and or abilities to damage your opponent without getting hit yourself. With enough practice, you can easily master these 2 concepts and climb that rank ladder. If you feel like you got something out of this guide, make sure to check out this other video on your left to learn more about cooldown tracking.